here today with Dr. Natasha Rajah. She's a professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly known as Ryerson, and focuses in on brain health, memory, and aging at the Department of Psychology. So welcome.
Thanks for having me, Natalie. Nice to meet you.
Well, I am very appreciative that you made the time to chat today. Brain health, aging, menopause, so important and starting to get more traction. So starting from the very beginning, what could you share about us that from the research is a bit unique in terms of how a woman's brain appears to be aging?
Sure. So I'll give a bit of a history in how I got to do the research.
That would be great.
I've been doing adult lifespan research looking at memory and brain health across the adult lifespan for more than 20 years. And we conducted a study between 2012 and 2018 called the Montreal Adult Lifespan Study, where we looked at how does the brain age and how do these changes in brain aging influence memory function. And what we noticed at that point in that study was that there really was a decline in memory-related function at midlife, and we were really surprised by how poorly our middle-aged adults were doing, because we were expecting more of a linear kind of decline with age.
Right.
We really saw a bit of a drop at midlife. And then when we started looking at what was the driving forces in that sample, we noticed that it really was driven by individuals at the age of 50, and our sample had more females than males. And so when you think of early 50s and you think of female sex, you're like, oh, well, this might be a menopause effect. So based on that, we first looked at whether there are sex differences in brain aging across the adult lifespan. Historically, people haven't looked at this because behaviorally, males and females show similar patterns of memory
Okay.
decline. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the neural mechanisms underlying that decline are the same. So on the surface, you might look the same, but the reason for that behavioral change might be quite different between males and females. And we really need to understand these sex differences because it has significant repercussions on how we target our therapies and look at interventions. So cognitive interventions, cognitive training, those kind of things depends on the brain systems implicated. And what we found was really the frontal and parietal brain systems. So these are systems involved for cognitive control or attention. And these systems seem to show age-related differences in females more so than males across the lifespan. So that was intriguing to us. And from there, we launched the Brain Health and Midlife and Menopause study, given the two things that we observed, that there's sex differences in brain aging, and there's this decline in memory at this midlife point. So bringing those two kind of findings together, we're like, oh, we really need to start focusing on menopause as perhaps a window for identifying females that might be showing early signs of cognitive decline and risk for dementia.
Amazing. And we know from some earlier work done that it appears that there's shifts in memory and recall in that perimenopause, menopause period, but then it seems to correct or return, if not to where you were before, a similar level. Does that still hold, or is it just more of a question we don't quite know yet?
It's a question we don't know yet for everybody. So there is some literature showing out there. So there's a few things. First, there's the cognitive complaints, right? So females showing up during the menopause transition, complaining about memory and brain fog and things
Yeah.
like that. Females present with this, what we call subjective memory complaints.
Mhm.
So that doesn't necessarily always track to there being a measurable
Right.
cognitive complaint, like objective memory complaint. There might be two reasons for that. One is that the tests that have been historically used may be insensitive, particularly because we tend to use verbal memory tests, and females throughout the lifespan have superior verbal memory.
Mhm.
And so if we're using tests where females are good at, we might be masking decline because they just have strong verbal memory. And
Right.
so in my lab, we use a spatial memory test. So it's called spatial context memory, the ability to memorize faces and their locations. And that's because we don't want to rely on verbal memory. We want to rely on a system and that on a task that relies on a brain system important for memory called the hippocampus.
Mhm.
And also make sure that individuals that have, you know, strengthened verbal memory can still show some sort of memory decline because it's not verbal in nature. And the other reason for choosing nonverbal stimuli is really to get at more equitable research testing, because individuals come to our lab from different backgrounds with different levels of English and French knowledge. So we need to be
Right.
able to, use stimuli that everyone can, is drawn to, such as faces. People find faces engaging as well, way more engaging than verbal stimuli. So it could be that. So, and then the reason that historically females, like the findings have been that most females do recover cognitive function. One could be because of the verbal testing that was used.
Yeah.
Um, and the other could be that, yes, so if you think of menopause as a time of neuroplasticity,
Hmm.
so there's a lot of change going on during menopause, estrogen decline, and then the brain really needs to rewire itself. The brain and body are, rewiring themselves. So it's an extremely plastic stage in femalehood. So during that plasticity, there might be some temporary glitches in the system as we
Right.
reorganize. So memory and brain fog and the tiredness that comes along with the menopause transition often. And for most females, we hope that, at the end result of that plasticity, they maintain their cognitive function and are, might even have new strengths and creative energies and things like that after that transition. But that may not be true for all females. And that's what we're trying to understand in my lab.
Right.
So is it a transitional stage? Is it just transient? Is it chronic for certain females?
Mhm.
And for those females for which it's chronic, is it an early sign of something like of a risk for Alzheimer's disease? And the reason we ask that question is because 2/3 of cases
Right.
of Alzheimer's disease is in females, and we want to understand why that is. And we know that Alzheimer's disease, the neuropathologies associated with Alzheimer's disease, are apparent in the brain decades before the symptom onset. So they may be apparent in some females in the age range of menopause. So it could be that females that continue to show chronic memory and cognitive challenges may be the ones at greater risk, whereas others, go through a transient state of brain fog, but come out stronger even maybe later in life. But we really don't know, Natalie.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
this is hypotheses and like conjecture at this point, and that's what like my lab is trying to answer these questions. We're looking at cross-sectionally right now, and that means we test someone at one time, and the differences we observe are between individuals. And the problem with that approach is that individuals differ. And so to control for that individual differences, we really need to be funded to do a longitudinal project where we bring individuals at pre, peri, and post menopause, and then late post menopause to see, are individuals who show decline in perimenopause and early premenopause still declining, or are some of them returning back to normative levels of function? And that's really the goal of my lab's work, is to try and answer this question and help identify females who might be at risk early on.
Well, it's so important. And so I don't think people could possibly appreciate how tricky it is to find samples across the different groups of menopause alone that are
Mhm.
fairly equal.
Yeah.
And then when you take into consideration, I'm assuming things like, have you had prior major concussion or like some of these things that might influence the subject group being a pure solid group. So I have all of the accolades and wow for the work
Thank
that you're
you.
doing and so grateful for it for sure.
Thank you.
And you spoke to, the fact that 2/3 of the Alzheimer's disease cases are women. And,
Mhm.
historically it kind of gotten labeled as like, it's just because of history or life events. And so now like the evidence is growing to say, no, this is not the case. And in fact, dementia and Alzheimer, as you mentioned, starting at midlife,
Mhm.
um, you know, during this perimenopause period, it seems to be such a critical window for heart, for bone, for brain.
Exactly.
And so, in terms of that plasticity, the question is, does it seem like it could potentially be an added benefit? Like, are there any good changes that might be happening in our brain like that? I'm just thinking about like the wisdom side of things.
Yeah, I think, every people have different experiences through menopause. And I think I could speak personally as a woman going through perimenopause myself right now. Um, I think there are some strengths. I think we really gain confidence and are more direct and in some ways more clear in our objectives and our directions we want from life. I think there is like this honing in our on ourselves and our strength that happens during menopause that we do when we come on the other end and we are menopaused. I think a lot of females do feel a sense of liberation and a sense of confidence and strength. So I think there is a lot of positive things that come out of menopause. Some people say they just stop, quote unquote, giving a crap about what other
Yeah.
people think of them, and they become very strong minded in who they are, which I think is a strength. But I think like with like plasticity, the flip side of plasticity is vulnerability.
Mm.
So it is two things that are happening. I do want to say that menopause is not pathological, right? It's something that all females with ovaries experience during midlife. And it's part of our endocrinological aging. It's part of being a woman. It's part of being a female. Like it's part of going through this stage in our life. And the majority will go through and arrive at the other end in good health. That's my belief. But just like in healthy aging, that doesn't mean we shouldn't study it, right? So it doesn't
Yeah.
mean exactly, like, we study, like I historically have studied healthy aging with the motivation of trying to identify what differentiates people that age well versus those that have more challenges, cognitive decline, and brain health issues as they age, in order to identify ways to intervene and what factors support optimal aging. And we could
Mhm.
approach menopause the same way so we can
Yeah.
minimize the disruptions females experience during, especially given, there's all of this work going on now because females are part of the workforce and we're leaders in our field at this stage of our life. And so we really need to develop opportunities and intervention and approaches that really can help us continue to achieve our maximum potential through this transition time.
Well, I think that's so important. You said that. I can't tell you the number of times I'm at an event or talking to women in leadership, and first off, they don't know necessarily that the brain fog and the lack of patience and the lack of motivation and the fatigue are even associated with menopause. And so once you sort of have that conversation, there's this huge sense of relief because it's followed by a what's wrong. I mean, these are, like A-type driven, typically
Mm,
personalities. And so it's followed by, what's wrong with me? Am I always going to be like this? And an erosion of confidence. And so we see women either downplaying their role, either, maybe taking time off and not being as effective, or actually leaving
mhm.
the workforce altogether. And so getting a handle on, how do we support that brain fog cognitive challenge during that time is so important
It is.
for women.
It is. And
Um,
knowing,
yeah,
like having care and options are important to be educated to know what your options are and how to approach this transition in a healthy way.
absolutely. I think even the awareness that this is what it is,
Yes.
a huge peace of mind. It doesn't solve or make it better, but there's some kind of, oh, okay. Versus like all the fear and confidence and all those
Mhm.
pieces. In terms of healthy aging, what do we know from your research, the research, are some good things we could do to support our brain in aging?
Sure. So there's the Lancet Commission that came out with modifiable and non-modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease at midlife. And I think it's important to look at those because a lot of the modifiable risk factors are lifestyle related. And if we could address them at midlife, males and females, and especially females as they go through menopause transition, I think we could really optimize our aging. So we know that 45% of dementia cases are avoidable based on this commission report. So if we address these modifiable risk factors. So for example, there's two things we have to consider when we give recommendations at midlife. One is to make sure that the recommendations we make are equity focused in the sense that, yes, eating right, exercising, all those things are good. Some individuals are more able to achieve those because of their financial status and time availability to them versus others. So I always think of a single mom that's, doing multiple jobs, trying to keep the family, you know, happy and functioning and keep taking care of herself as well, and how strained that is to then for her to get the advice when she goes to a GP, well, you know, eat well,
Yeah.
sleep more,
Yeah. Thank you.
exercise more. And she's like,
Thank you.
how, where am I
Yeah.
going to, how
Yeah.
am I, like, it's an additional, now
Yeah.
you almost feel a double whammy because you feel this self-blame of, oh, I should be doing these things too, and why can't I? Especially if you're an overachiever type, like you want
Yeah.
to achieve, right?
And you kind of get that all or nothing mindset too, right? Like it's like, oh, just
Exactly.
forget it then.
Yeah, so we have like, of course, if you can eat well and if you can take the time to exercise, these are, you know, amazing options to do to reduce your risk for all sorts of things as we age, right? Not just
Mhm.
dementia, but all sorts of diseases of aging. But if you have challenges prioritizing those things because of finances or time and stress, you know, the first thing is to deal with that stress and find opportunities to de-stress because a lot of these risk factors, these modifiable factors, they're either the result of a life of stress or they cause the stress. So dealing with stress, you could finding ways to optimize your sleep.
Mhm.
So this is something that doesn't cost money, but you know, finding ways to like take the time to de-stress, take a couple breaths. You know, meditation is free.
Mhm.
Some things are free and they could really help. And then there's also quitting things. So if you are a smoker, quit smoking. You will save a ton of cash and you will be healthier in the long run. If you drink alcohol, you know, look at how much are you drinking? Can you minimize the amount? You know, there's always this literature on heart health with alcohol that people bring to
Mhm.
me. And I'm like, the trade-off is minimal, like, you know, really the heart benefits are minimal compared to the risks with more than the daily amount. So it's really important. Like that's another way you could also save money by not, you know, drinking as much wine or something. And really taking, like trying to carve some time for just downtime. Like I know
Mhm.
it very much sounds like a Gen Z thing, you know, self-care. My daughter's always talking about self-care. But we, you know, those of us from Generation X and older might really need to listen to that and try and get half an hour where you maybe meditate, have a glass of tea, you know, a mug of tea and relax and get that sleep that you require. And then
Well,
of
and I think that goes right back to our women in leadership
yeah,
point where there's this mindset of more, more, faster, faster, and guilt associated with like taking a quick nap during the day if you can, taking 30 minutes and going for, something that's a walk after you eat lunch to stabilize your blood glucose and reboot your mental model. And so there's a guilt associated with that, that's not productive time. And so like dealing with that entire mindset that we have about work and
I
who
know.
we are as workers and the pressure to make sure that you're always showing that you're, a great leader, a great performer.
Yeah,
Um, yeah,
exactly. And
yeah,
I see that a lot. Like people like, oh, I'm supposed to get my 10,000 steps in, so I'll take all my meetings on the phone while I walk. Right? It's, you know, yes, you're getting the steps in, but part of the process of getting those steps is not only the cardiovascular benefits, but also the benefits of basically detaching from things and experiencing nature and going for a walk and just taking that moment of silence. I think those benefits are also just as important. So if you do take a walk, even if it's a short walk, you know, try and look around and observe nature and get out of your mind a bit.
yeah. And so there are hypotheses around the impact of the decline on estrogen, both in perimenopause and menopause on the brain. What
Mhm.
are some of the theories around if and why this has the impact it has?
Yeah, so during perimenopause, the levels of estrogen, progesterone, they're quite erratic, but they are on general declining. So it's kind of like a zigzag across,
Right.
and you're eventually going down. And then at menopause, there's very little ovarian estrogens. There's still estrogen in the body being produced through fat deposits being processed, but really, so estrogen is a major hormone. There's many types of estrogens. There's not one single estrogen. The one that most of my kind of research centers on is on estradiol 17 beta or E2, which is
Mhm.
an estrogen that circulates both peripherally and centrally in the nervous system. So there are receptors for E2 in the brain. And interestingly, there's a lot of these receptors in areas very critical for memory and cognitive function, such as the hippocampus, which I mentioned earlier. So damage to the hippocampus. So this comes from work by Brenda Milner and others. So patients that have damage to the hippocampus, either through, traumatic brain injury or epilepsy-related damage, they really have difficulties with forming new memories and retrieving old memories. So we know that the hippocampus is a critical node for memory. And then when it comes to the prefrontal cortex, we know that it's an important area for cognitive control, is the term we use in the scientific world, but it really is for organizing and planning your ongoing patterns of behavior and planning for the future. Also, organizing your emotions and kind of maintaining your personality as well, the way that you engage with the world. There's some types of cognitive functions, such as working memory and attention. These are things that people might have heard. So our ability to stay focused in a sustained way that also rely on the frontal cortex and its relationship to the parietal. So the frontal and hippocampus is very important for many behaviors that we experience, because we're constantly engaging our memory and our cognitive control processes. So when you think of estrogen declining, and then the areas of the brain that are most affected by this decline, you realize why the symptoms as we rewire and reorganize our brain in relation to this decline is so cognitive in nature for some females, because they really
Right.
are in the centers of the brain that are important for these cognitive functions.
And so talk a bit about the research coming down the pipeline. What are some of the key areas that your research program is looking at?
Sure. So the other thing I wanted to mention is that we know that estrogen has profound effects on cardiovascular health,
Yes.
um, in liver health and kidney health. So it's a body, it's very present in the body and in the brain. And so two things that happen during menopause to some females is you get an increase in cardiovascular risk factors. So because of the benefits of estrogen for vascular health and endothelial function of the heart. And so some females will show, hypertension increases during menopause transition. Other females, it also has a lot of effects on immune response and inflammation in the
Right.
body as well. And so some females might see that there's more inflammatory responses in their body to things. So there's also a increased risk of diabetes and obesity and things. So these are two pathways by which estrogen decline in the periphery in the body might then lead to greater risk factors for some females, because these are also risk factors for dementia.
Oh,
So poor
okay.
vascular health at midlife, poor inflammatory responses, or excessive inflammation at midlife. These are known risk factors for dementia later in life. So, and we know that estrogen and declines in estrogen kind of trigger these responses in some females. And I always like to emphasize some
Right.
females, because it's not all females that experience this. And it's determining what differentiates those females that have these kind of negative outcomes, and whether there are lifestyle or, pharmaceutical interventions that could help mitigate those effects so they age well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting how, so I always think of it like there's all these symptoms, but then there's all these silent life risks
Exactly.
like cardiac, like cardiometabolic, like brain. And so it would be interesting to know, like, for these women, because you hear I didn't have any symptoms, I sailed through it, and my brain automatically goes to, well, what about your heart? What about your,
Mhm.
but I guess my question is, I wonder if they're completely asymptomatic in terms of like no cholesterol increase, no blood pressure increase, no plaques. Like, what is it in some women that maybe um, don't have as much of an impact through menopause?
Yeah, that's a very, like, looking at the flip side, like who goes through menopause with minimal side effects, to say, put it
Yeah.
in a different term. Yeah, I think that's a very important question. And we do see there are females, like, in our postmenopause um sample of females like that have superior memory. Like their memory is just as good as our young adults. And they're in the cognitive aging literature, these individuals, and if you keep tracking them into older age, they probably continue to maintain cognitive function. And they're termed maintainers. So,
Mhm.
cognitive maintainers that maintain their health. And people do study them to understand what are their lifestyles that are helping them optimally age? And there's a couple things that we know about them. So on a neurological level, they tend to keep their hippocampus relatively intact and the volumes intact. There's a paper that just came out today from a group in Toronto that showed that, the hippocampus level was related to thalamus level, which is an area of the brain that's a big, a gating kind of area of the brain, very critical, understudied lately. So we have these kind of brain metrics. But then when you take a step further and say, what are their lifestyle factors and what are their genetics? So we don't really have control of our genetics, and certain genes are bigger risk factors for different types of dementias. And so these individuals obviously are free of these genes. And then there's also the social determinants of health.
Right.
So social determinants of health, such as education. So that's another thing that, we know that individuals that have a higher level of education tend to age well. We also know individuals that have had a long-term quality of life, free of stress, and have been eating well and are healthy and are from higher socioeconomic status, they also age well comparatively. So there are these lifestyle and social, societal
Mhm.
policy factors that could support aging. And then there's like the personal factors such as the diet, exercise, sleep, and all of those things as well that help maintainers. But we're really still trying to know, this is an active, like, is it just genetic luck? And we
Right.
can't really, that's the other question. Like some of these individuals that age really well, should we be looking to them? Like that's a theoretic, like from theories, like are they the ones we should be studying to understand how to age well for the general population who don't have these benefits?
Hmm.
Or should we be looking at individuals like resilience, which is another
Hmm.
concept? This idea of individuals that have had challenges throughout their life, but are still able to maintain good brain health,
Hmm.
maintain,
Absolutely.
who are they and what are their strategies for overcoming the challenges that they've faced. So this concept of resilience as well, which is something I'm very interested in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's such an interesting thing for sure. So tell us what's coming down the pipeline in terms of some of
Yeah.
the big questions you're tackling.
So, funding permitting, some of the big questions is to bring females back and to, ideally, like if if there was unlimited resources, the ideal study would be to have at least a couple cohorts of longitudinal female cohorts where we could look at all the sex-specific experiences that females have in their lifetime, such as, menarche and puberty transition. And then you look at parity and reproductive health and how that relates. And then you look at menopause, all these
Right.
sex-specific experiences that females have to really get a longitudinal study to understand how are these things and their lifestyles interacting to support or hinder how females go through aging. That would be like the ideal study if I were. But right now in my lab, we're trying to bring back females that already participate in our BAM study. We're looking for funding and support for that. And then we're going through two different mechanisms. So some trainees in my lab are looking at vascular health, and they're very interested in looking at how so heart-brain axis, and
Yes.
we're looking at blood-based biomarkers and how they relate to brain health. And then another angle is looking at inflammatory markers. So they're
Hmm.
complementary, like these
Right.
two things often go hand in hand, but really looking at in different ways using different types of blood-based biomarkers. So in our study, what we do is we collect blood from individuals, and then we genotype individuals to see if they have certain risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. And then we also look at biomarkers for vascular health, for inflammation, and also for Alzheimer's disease. And so there are some blood biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease that people are now studying. So we're looking at this, and as we do these more complex studies, we really need to increase the sample sizes. So this will be something that is ongoing for the next few years in my lab to get the sample sizes required to answer these kind of multifactorial questions. And the other thing I'm really passionate about, and the reason my lab moved from Montreal to Toronto was really to increase the diversity of our
Mhm.
sample. So most of the research in this area and in the cognitive neuroscience of aging, especially in North America, obviously in the Western hemisphere, has been in highly educated white individuals. Like it
Right,
just, because, and it's a history, there's a history reason for that, historical reason for that. So psychology and a lot of these kind of studies were done using undergraduate students,
right,
right, primarily. So then you want to match your older adults, so you don't have education and socioeconomic status as a bias. And so you end up with these really highly educated samples. Um, and so we really need to increase the diversity of who is participating in our study, because only by doing that can we really understand the effects of social determinants of health and things that in the public we could change policy wise to really lift up the general population's health as well.
100%.
And that's really what's needed because we do know that there's going to be a lot of older adults. So Canada is going to become a super ager society shortly, in 2026, like very shortly. 21%
Yeah,
of our population will be above the age of 65. And age is the primary risk factor for all these diseases we're talking about. And so we really need to optimize the aging of our adults in Canada. And that means taking both a policy approach to lift up the social determinants of health and and minimize them, and also take an individual approach. By including diverse individuals, we really can look at intersectionality. So I always say that women's health is really important, and so is intersectionality if we want to achieve the goal of precision medicine. So
right.
we can't otherwise, like,
No,
can't get individualized care without the data to inform that type of individualized care.
exactly, exactly. Um, if there was one myth or misconception about women and the human brain that you wish you could wash away, what would it be?
I would, to see menopause as a problem is probably the one thing I hear a lot. I understand there's a lot of challenges and we should study it, we should improve it, but it's not a disease. It's not something pathological. Women are not functioning at a lower state on average because of these experiences. Like, that I want to wash away. And I don't think the other thing to wash away is just different is not bad, right? So there are sex differences in brain aging. There are sex-specific experiences that affect brain health. This isn't bad. It's not something negative. It's just
It's
different.
different.
And
Yeah.
we just need to understand it so we could help people more appropriately.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
No, thanks for having me.
Hopefully, we can have you back to talk more brain health
Yeah.
another time.
Yeah. As the data comes out, I'll be happy to share what we're finding with you. Thank you again.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right.